everyone, welcome to my first ever Patreon video. I've got so many exciting ideas and I can't wait to start sharing everything with you, but for now, thank you so much for joining me here. I've got a few plans for tutorials already, but again, if there's anything that you want to know or any paintings that you think you would like to paint in the future, let me know and I can try and create a tutorial or a draw with me around whatever subject that you'd like. For now, today, I really wanted to take you on a bit of a sketchbook tour. I've filmed sketchbook tours before, but I've never given my opinion on my work. I think critiquing your work is quite difficult, and sometimes looking back on early work, especially as an artist, because you're always usually full of a lot of self-criticism. I know I am. So I've never provided my own opinion on my work. So usually the sketchbook tours I do, I'll just sort of flip through my sketchbook and you can just see what I've been doing. But this time I actually wanted to give a little bit of insight into how I feel about my work, the processes I used, any sort of tips that I would tell myself going forward if I was to ever draw this again. Yeah, and I guess it's also kind of nice for me to go through my early work as well, because I mean I only did this in May 2020, so I say early work, I mean last year's work. But I mean, I think my processes have changed a lot since then. The subjects that I like to paint have changed a lot since then, and you know, we're always changing. As creatives, our ideas are always evolving. We're always feeding off the things around us, and therefore what you created a few months ago might not be as relevant to you now, but it's still really interesting and it's such an important journey. And that's what I think a lot of people forget, is that, you know, they want to be amazing artists straight away, but it takes time. It takes real time and effort and perseverance to get to the skill level that you want. And I'm not where I want to be, but I think going back over your old work can show you how much you've improved. Anyway, I'll stop rambling and I'll show you my sketchbook. Hi everyone. So this is the sketchbook that we're going to be talking about today. This is my first ever, I say ever, my first sketchbook outside of school. And as an adult, so I'm going to be chatting to you about all the work that I did here. I started the sketchbook back in May 2020. Did about 2 paintings in May and then stopped because I had no idea what I was doing. And then picked it back up again maybe June, July, and then completed it pretty quickly. It's a little Stillman and Mern sketchbook. I'm going to put all the details in the description somewhere. Anyway, let's go. So, first page. This was a little study, so I took the sketchbook actually out to the park, and our local park has a little section full of flowers that they sort of update and plant out every year. They had some little hyacinths, irises, there was cherry blossom everywhere. It was, yeah, beautiful. So I just thought I would start with some little studies just to sort of kickstart my creativity. I was in a bit of a weird place, so I hadn't done anything creative really for ages, unless you count the photography that I do for work. But I hadn't really done anything, I hadn't done painting for years, and I mean, not since I was about, well, we did a little bit of uni, but not much. Oh God, 10 years, 11 years? I don't know, but a long time. So I thought I'd just try and get myself back into that. And, you know, work was a bit strange. The pandemic had just hit. Loads of my clients, because there were like small boutique gyms and there were small business owners that couldn't open, they all had to sort of stop work. So I only had like 3 which would be my long-term, you know, clients, luckily, that stuck around. So I've still been able to pay myself, but it was such a weird time that I was like, oh my God, I don't know what, you know, I don't know what's going to happen this year. I need to find something to take my mind off my failing business. So yeah, I'm really glad that I started. So this is the first thing I did. Yeah, looking at it, I mean, I still kind of love it, not for its technical skill, but just because, you know, it brings back those early memories of, you know, starting to paint again. And yeah, I mean, I was always really into painting with a lot of texture. So I know you can't really see on camera, but the hyacinths are really, that's quite a textural paint over there. This is all in acrylic. By the way, I started painting in acrylic rather than gouache because I had tiny tubes of acrylic which I found at the house. yeah, I think this is the only study I've done in here like this. And this was a really good, easy way for me to get back into painting without having that pressure of drawing a full landscape and freaking out that it was going to be too much work and then stopping. This is another little study. This was, I think this is a photo by, oh my god, I'm going to put his name. He's a garden and nature photographer. I'll put his link to his Instagram in the description somewhere. But he took this amazing photograph of a churchyard with rows and rows and rows of spring bulbs. So I just again picked up my paints a couple of weeks after doing this initial thing and just played around with colour. I don't know if you can see very clearly, but the brush strokes are really textural. I didn't really care about how the finished product was going to look because when I first started painting again, I didn't plan on sharing this with anyone. This was just going to be a sketchbook for myself. Yeah, I mean, I love it. I think the colour is very different to what I do now. So I love going back and seeing all the brights that I've used. I also love the little tiny brush marks here in between the rows. And when I first started painting again, I did all these kind of, I guess, more impressionist brush marks, whereas as I went on, and I'll talk about that later, as I went on, I started kind of getting rid of that because it didn't look realistic. Yeah, but I love that, and I think I might try and bring that back in again. You can probably see in this one as well that the brush strokes are still very similar to how they were here. It's those less realistic, more stylized brush strokes. I wasn't hung up on making things look real. I didn't really care about that. I think it's much more interesting creatively to paint your own artistic interpretation of your reference image rather than copying it, rather than copying it directly. I think copying directly just takes the fun out of painting. So this was just an image that I found on Pinterest of a woman picking flowers, and I changed the flowers up, so I drew sort of these stylized lupins. I added, I don't know what this is just shapes, and kind of created these hills. I wanted to look like it was sort of flowing. Added daisies in the front here. Again, these are really textured. I don't know if you can see that, but they're super textured, so if I run my finger over them, they're really bobbly. I love it. Oh, I lie, I did do another one of these. Okay, so this was another study. I think I took these from old reference images that I had, apart from that, which I think was in my garden. So we've got sweet peas, we've got hyacinths again, we've got blossom, lily of the valley, we've got leaves and other little leafy things here. I wasn't that pleased with this one, to be honest, but I just sort of did it for the sake of painting, really. The pages are getting a bit stuck together. This is quite an old book now. This is one of my favourite paintings ever. I love it. If I could paint like this again, I would. I think I might, actually. It just gave me so much pleasure. And I look at it now and I think, oh my god, like this was the pinnacle of my painting journey, which is really sad because it was the first month I started painting. I love the colours so much, and when I paint, I like to imagine what that painting would look like in my own home, and I feel like I've gotten a little bit hung up on painting for other people's pleasure rather than my own. Sometimes when I look back at my paintings, I think, why on earth did I paint that? That, I would never have that in my own home. I would never print that off and display it, which is really strange. So sometimes I wonder why I painted what I painted, but at the time painting it gives me pleasure, so maybe it's more the process than the finished product that I like. But this one, I loved the process and I love the finished piece, and I would happily blow that up and have that on my wall. For me, it's the tones. I love the tones of these hills. I just love, again, the brush marks here, the little lupin-y type wavy grass. I love that it doesn't look like a picture perfect replica of an image. It's, it has depth, it has like soul, I guess. Yeah, I just love it. One of my faves. Again, I think this was acrylic, I'm pretty sure. This I loved as well. I think this is the first one that I sort of started defining a lot of my style. This is a study from a picture taken by Harkon. I will link the picture in the description. It took ages. I remember this vividly because it took 3 days to paint. Again, it's all in acrylic. I started, I think, here with all the background. I had no idea how I was going to build the layers, and I hadn't really thought that far ahead. I just blocked out the shapes, painted all the background in. I think I left the path until really late. And I can see, looking back, that I used so many different brush strokes. I think I might have just used one brush, but just used that same brush in really different ways. So you can see here I've got really short sort of stubby grass here, which I've layered up. I think I used about 4 or 5 different shades of green there, and then the white on top. Same over here. So these were just sort of really quick brush strokes, sort of like a, I don't know, like short stubby grass, and then added loads of depth with different tones of green, heading darker as it went around here so that I wouldn't have to put more detail into here. Interestingly, with this bush, I've actually started with a light paint and then gone over with dark, so I don't know why I did that, but I really like it. And over here there's some really interesting brush textures here, which it's like I've tried to rub some of it away and then it didn't work, but it's come out really nicely. Yeah, again, I really like this one. I thought I'd actually hate looking back at these, but no, I love it. I love these really stylised leaves here, and my favourite thing of all are these sort of ferny, wispy ferns that I've put in here. I love that, and I had so much fun painting those. It's the first time drawing grass as well. This is a tiny section here. Yeah, overall I love it. I think I'll actually have this on my wall as well. Yeah. This one I wasn't pleased with. I think it's because I stepped away from the green and tried doing something that wasn't very leafy. And that was the first time I tried that. So again, this was another study from Harkon. Beautiful, beautiful image taken in Japan. But I think it was just too urban for me. I mean, I love the sweeping mountains and I do love some of these greens, but it just wasn't green enough. And I think that's when it hit me that I much prefer drawing nature than I do urban landscapes. It just didn't feel like it had as much depth that I wanted, and I think the depth for me comes from those layers of greens and all those trees. Unsure about this one. I can't decide whether I like it. It was very quick. I don't think it took me very long. Again, it's that really unrealistic grass, but I quite like that. But I think perhaps there's too much of a contrast between this like stylised style here and then the more realistic deep trees over here. This is kind of the style that I still paint in now. And this is the sort of thing that I'd like to bring back into my work, but maybe not quite as much as this. I also think my colour mixing wasn't great here. It looks a bit murky. I don't know what you think. I think this looks really good, but I just think some of the grass looks a bit murky, like I rushed that. I also didn't put a sky in, which I often didn't at the beginning because I just thought it was boring. I just left blank spaces, which I quite like, but I think this could have done with a bit of something here to bring it together. So this is my first try at painting a forest. This was a little bluebell forest. Again, I think it was a reference picture that I found on Pinterest, which I used a lot when I first started painting, because I was never expecting to make anything of painting. I didn't think I was ever going to sell my work. I didn't think I was ever going to make a shop. I never thought I was going to teach it. I just, you know, it was only a tiny project that I was never going to show anyone. And then, I don't know, things just sort of took off. So a lot of these early works, you'll see, I don't have the rights to sell them, but they were just fun to practice painting with. So we've got some cow's parsley, which I added. I don't think that was in the image, but I just added that in. Love the little valley. The bluebells have so much texture. I'm just running my finger over it because it feels really nice. Yeah, I mean, it's not my favourite piece of work. I think if I was to do this again, I'd put a lot more depth in. I'd do something over here. I think I just got bored because it took me a long time. And I don't know if you can see it, if I hold it up closer, that there are so many layers in this. And my work did take me days. It would take me 2 half days, so like 10-12 hours to paint one tiny piece, and the sketchbook's teeny. Yeah. I'll probably put more detail on the trees here as well, I think. Oh god, these are really getting stuck. Oh yeah, I loved this. I really loved this actually. I would still have this as a print if I could. Just love it, just love the colours. And again, it's those brush strokes that I love, and the different types of brush stroke in these sort of block sections, which I don't do anymore. I also really like I think they were I think I was probably inspired by lupins again, but they sort of look a little bit like grasses as well. I would probably put more detail into the trees here actually, because they stand out really well against that beautiful pink sky, but they're a bit sparse. I think I rushed that one a little bit, but yeah, love it. This was a recreation of one of Tara Jane Art's gouache studies. I don't think I'd moved into gouache by this point. I think I was still using acrylic. What was I? This looks like gouache down here. I might have been using a mixture of both perhaps. So back when I first started painting again, all of the art shops were closed. We're in the middle of a lockdown, so I couldn't get any art supplies. So I was still using rubbish tubes of acrylic that I had, but I think by then I'd maybe ordered some gouache. As you can see here, the paint got so thick that it started to tear in the middle where it's got stuck to the other side. I loved this. I still like it a lot actually. I changed the background a lot. I think I redid that background 4 or 5 times. I couldn't work out what I wanted, and I knew I didn't want the same. That I think Tara had managed to do this really nice wash of gouache at the back, and because I didn't have the right materials, I couldn't get the same consistency. The hairs looked like it was just fading into the distance. It looked really beautiful, but I just couldn't get that same look. So I decided to make it into a bit of a stylized forest. I think it worked alright, but yeah, as you can see, it's so thick at the end that it's just getting stuck on everything. This is another reference picture from Pinterest. I think it's the Swiss Alps. I don't know, it could be Austria. Oh no, maybe it's Italy. Oh, I don't know. Anyway, it's somewhere nice. I think the original image had a little VW camper, like driving down the middle, but it was orange, and obviously, you know, I paint in green, so. Yeah, I really like this one. I think it took a long time again. Still using these really interesting brush strokes on the mountains to add a bit more depth. Love the short grass. I hadn't quite finished practicing my flowy grass brushstroke techniques by this point. But I really love the addition of the little tiny flowers here. I was going for a dandelion seed head vibe. I also like the way I used a old brush, I think, for the clouds. So it was a really dry old brush and just brought some of the clouds a bit lower over the mountains, which I like. This is my first Studio Ghibli recreation. This took so long, oh my god. And I think this sort of changed how I painted from this point on. It wasn't until I looked at Studio Ghibli reference images that it just made me realise how much depth goes into this style of painting. It took me so long. These shadows over here took hours. There's just so much detail that you don't notice until you start recreating it. So there's a lot of layers here. But I remember about halfway through already loving it, and that's such a weird thing, because normally when I'm halfway through a painting it just looks like absolute crap until you put the last detailed brush strokes in right at the end, and then it starts to really tie together. But I remember this because I was working, I think, in sections, so whereas usually I work, you know, base layer, and then I put in shadows, then I put in highlights, and it happens sort of layer by layer by layer, but all over the whole painting. Whereas this one I was working, you know, in sections, so I do a bit of shadow work and then I put the highlights in, so that would really come to life, whereas the rest of it would be still blank white paper. So I could really see it coming together a little bit easier. So I think that also gave me a bit of motivation to just keep going with it. And I just, yeah, I would never have thought to like put these little patches of light in. I had no idea how to do it. When I saw the image, I was like, I don't know how they've managed to get this patch of light here and this bit here, and even over here there were just little rays of sunshine falling on it, and I had no idea how I was going to do that, but it somehow worked. And I think I just used a slightly lighter lime green and then used a white green over the top to try and replicate that. Yeah, I really love that. This one I wasn't sure of. I'm still not sure of it really. I think if I were to do it again, I would firstly make the background greens less murky. There's too much olive green in here, and I think I put too much brown in. I'd make that a little bit more vibrant. I'd also make the sky is a bit patchy. I think I was using gouache for this point. And I'd make it a little bit lighter as well. And the mid-ground, I should really have, instead of sectioning off like this and having it quite flat, I should have put a bit of texture, so made this darker green section a little bit more at a jagged angle, so that when I put the grasses in, it would look like it was sort of flowing a bit more naturally, rather than having these sort of flat lines and then grass over the top. I mean, I don't hate it. I think it's quite cute. I love the foxgloves, and I think I'd still try and recreate something with foxgloves again. I love the little daisies as well. But yeah, I think I just can't see past this annoying flat line here. And the stupid murky green. Yeah, I think this should be a similar shade to this, I think. Oh well. I don't love or hate this. Meh. It's a bit dark. I love the foreground. I think if I could have just a page of this foreground, that'd be great. I love that. But instead we've got the valley. And I think technically it's fine. It's just that I think I put too much shadow in, where I could have gotten away with not using such a dark green. Yeah, I don't know. I quite like the dry brush strokes for the poppies. There's quite a lot of movement in there, which is not quite nice. This one was another, or was it Tara Jane Art, or was it someone else? I can't remember who did this, and that's really annoying, but I'm gonna put it in the description so you can check it out, the original one. I loved her use of greens and all the layers, and it looked so simple until I recreated it, obviously. It always looks so simple until you do it yourself. But it made me realise that you could sort of block out the background in these really deep shades and then just draw lighter things on top of it and not worry too much about how it looks. You know, such quick brush strokes that made it look like leaves. More impressions of leaves and branches rather than painstakingly drawing out each one individually. Yeah, I love these little ferns that we've popped in here. The colours are great. I think the perspective on the stairs is a bit off, and I'll probably rework that were I to do it again now. You know, some of the lines aren't completely straight. It's a bit of a strange angle, but yeah, all in all, still quite like it. This is a little hut in a field with a little stream that runs down here, and it has a whole huge patch of long grasses and cow's parsley at the front of it. This is in my hometown, so the walk that we used to do pretty much every day during lockdown, I'd always stop and take a photo of this place because it just looked so nice, and I could imagine myself living here and painting outside. Yeah, I still really like this. It reminds me of not being able to do very much apart from walk around a local area. And I think it just has a lot of depth to it as well. I started by blocking out, I think you can probably still see here this because I haven't covered it over fully, but I blocked out with really, really dark green these sections here. I popped in, I think it was a flat green here, and then an olive green back here, and then just started building out these layers and layers and layers of leaves. I think there's about 4 or 5 layers here. Starting with darker olive greens, then going to greens with a little bit of blue, added a bit of white, added another layer, and then lastly I popped in this really bright, lovely lime green to make it look like the sun was sort of hitting off those leaves at the front, and the same on this side. I didn't put an awful lot here. I think there's some very dark browny green leaves in there to give the impression of something in the shadow there. And then the grasses, I had so much fun. This was like the first time I started painting really washy grasses. I think I'd already bought new paintbrushes by this point, which made it a lot easier. And I started with these mid greens and then added more whites and sort of built it out like that. Just so much fun. Layering grasses is one of the most fun painting techniques I think I've tried. Oh wait, you can see here that I've actually done it in 3 sections. So olive green, mid green, and then there's brown right at the front. I don't think I needed the brown really. Could have done without that. But there you go. And then lastly I added the dark green sections of grass and then added the little tiny dots of cow's parsley. I also added a few dots over here as well so that the eye sort of draws towards the little hut. I still really love this. I think this is maybe one of my favourite sketchbooks now looking back at it. I'll show you the other 2 at another point, maybe next week. But this was a study again from a Pinterest photo of what I think is a little country lane in England. It looks like the UK. One thing that I really found interesting was this section here. So I painted obviously the shadow under the tree, I just blocked it out, and then thought I'd have to do a lot of work on trying to make that look a little bit more realistic and less blocky. But actually, as soon as I put the grass in, it just sort of flowed so well, and I left it as it was, and I still love that. I still love that a lot, this little section. Another big learning curve for me with these they're not hedgerows, what are they? I don't know what the word for it is. But these grasses here by the side of the road, that took me a long time to get right. I think I started blocking it out in like a black and green mix, which you can see where the shadows are. I just painted half, so I penciled in these ridges, then painted the shadows here, and then just built on top of that, and built and built and built and built and built. But it took me a long time till I was happy with that, and I'm still not really happy with it, but I don't know what I changed. This is the annoying thing about not knowing. Like, I'm still learning and still teaching myself painting, so when I'm looking back at stuff, I know that I would change it and I wouldn't do the same thing again, but I also don't know exactly how I'd change it. I just think maybe it's more intuitive. I think I would also redo these trees if I had the chance as well, because there's just not a lot of depth there, and I think I rushed them a little bit. Yeah. I do love, again, I think I've just got a real love for dandelion heads, but I love the little round dandelions here. I think that really kind of pulls it together. Okay, so another Studio Ghibli study. I loved doing this one. I just love doing Studio Ghibli studies, to be fair. If there's ever a time where you feel like you need to practice mixing, or if you need practice creating depth and shadow, I'd really recommend just studying a couple of Studio Ghibli reference photos or film stills. I mean, especially this one, if you can see how many tones of green there are in this hedge, it was insane. I just had never really considered just how much depth you could add in. I mean, I don't know, I could count them all, but it would take me ages. There was a lot of different greens in here, and that took me hours to build this out. I think I did most of it in this really deep, almost black here, and then built it over with this sort of grey kind of green here, and then some of it's almost blue. There's a very blue light shadow here and over here. Yeah, I just had a lot of fun blocking out this. Again, playing with brush strokes and texture. Yeah. And as you can see, again, like most of my paintings, I blocked out the base layers. So this was one block, that was a block there, and this whole section here was another block, with the path being another one here. And I think the part that took me the longest was this section here, because there's just so much depth. But the rest of it was pretty simple. So this was just a few different tones of green and just building up the grasses here, so there's a bit of depth in the shadow. The rest of it are just really quick brush strokes. The same with here, so it was one base layer of light green. I've broken some of the sections down with a bit of olive green here, and then the rest of it is just patches of grass with darker grass to give a little bit of contrast in the foreground, and then these big wildflowers here. I think the trickiest bit was actually painting this little hat because it's right over the crease. I could not get that looking neat for the life of me. I ended up having to go around it with pen. It was so tricky. Yeah, but I really like this piece, and it definitely taught me a lot about mixing. Honestly, I don't know what was going on with me this week. Clearly, I was just drawn to a lot of Ghibli. This is another one. Originally in the film there is a character sat here overlooking the water, but I don't really like drawing people, so I left that bit out. I mostly chose to use this reference because of the reflections. I hadn't really drawn much water, so I thought that'd be a really good test of skill. I also loved the way that the trees have been drawn. They were really rounded, very different to any of the trees I'd drawn previously, so I thought that could be some really good practice. Because gouache is still a new medium for me, I still use it in a very similar way to acrylic, so I use it quite thickly. Rather than, I don't really water it down like you would watercolour as much. I tend to, for the skies and water, I tend to really slap it on. But I quite like that. I think it's quite versatile as well, so you can do pretty much whatever you want with gouache in it. And it works well. I like, still actually looking back at this, I really like the brush strokes that I've popped in here to show these reflections. This, I'm not a fan of this. It looks so flat and boring. Sometimes when I start painting, I haven't thoroughly thought out the process. And this was one of those paintings. So had a reference picture that I didn't mind, like it wasn't my favourite thing ever, but I thought it would be a good test of skill, especially drawing more detailed mountains. But I just didn't plan it very well, I don't think, and I didn't know what colours I was going to be using, so I'd always suggest at least knowing roughly, even if it means, you know, you don't have to colour swatch everything and really know exactly what colours you're using, because again, I paint very intuitively, it sort of just happens as I go. But I think in this case I just hadn't really considered what I was going to be doing, and I knew I didn't want to copy the photo exactly, and I wanted to put my own artistic interpretation onto it, but I hadn't considered what that interpretation was going to be. I used brown here, and I'm not sure why. Again, the shadow that I built into this hill here I hadn't thought through properly, and I left a really harsh line. I don't know, I'm not a fan, really. And again, I wanted to get these really lovely wheat looking grasses in the same way that I did this one. It just wasn't working for me, and I think it's just because I didn't build enough layers and I got impatient, and I should have just stuck with it and carried on and really built all these different textures and layers and types of colour here, but you know, I got bored. You can tell I got bored. So yeah, not a great piece, to be honest. But you know, you can't love every piece of work you do, right? This one, again, like, it's fine. I think it lacks a feature, like a main, I don't know where my eye is being drawn, and I think what makes a painting good is having something to focus on. It's the same with photography, you know. It's having a subject or somewhere where your eye is drawn and everything just sits around that feature. But this just didn't have that. There's a lovely tree. I think maybe if the tree was more prominent, maybe it'd look a bit better. This patch of bluebells here just weren't prominent enough to be the feature either. There's a lot of negative space. Again, I didn't consider edging this layer so you can see a really defined line between the midground and the foreground. So I should again have made this edge look a little bit grass-like and drawn some sort of wispy bits of grass coming out of that, and then drawn the lighter tones on top of it to make it blend in a bit more. I mean, I don't hate it, obviously. It's fine. But there's just a lot that I'd change. Or maybe I just wouldn't draw this style of painting again. I just don't think there's enough going on. It was good practice for bark though. I did enjoy doing that. And one thing about drawing trees is that the bark always looks, until you really start looking at it and the colours in the bark, it looks like one flat colour. So trying to create shadow out of just lots of dark tones is a little bit tricky. So if you want practice doing that, I would recommend some sort of close-up bark studies. This was the only thing in the sketchbook I think that wasn't green, or wasn't majority green. It makes me a bit uncomfortable because it's orange and I like green. As far as paintings go, I think it's fine. I wouldn't draw this again. I just wanted some practice drawing foreground flowers. It was really good practice drawing a sunset as well, so learning how to fade gouache from dark to light. By this point I still didn't really know how to blend gouache, so as you can see the lines between the cloud and the sky are very harsh. I'm still practicing actually with that. I'm not so great at blending. It's something that doesn't really come very naturally to me, but I mean I've improved a lot from here. And you can see as well that I was getting kind of caught up in painting for the sake of painting rather than painting what I actually like. So what I like are, you know, this kind of thing, that. This is not what I like. Like, I do not look at that. And I would never like anyone else's paintings of this either. It's just, I don't find it interesting. But it was a good test of skill, I guess. I also found actually, so if you use gouache, you'll know already that painting on top of gouache in layers can be really annoying unless you're using an acrylic gouache, because the gouache reactivates on every layer. So if you're painting a block layer, which I often do, painting another layer of gouache on top of that reactivates that bottom layer, so it can look a little bit murky, and that was quite frustrating. So I think with this one I ended up buying myself some acrylic gouache, just so I didn't have that. And because I learnt to paint, or taught myself to paint using mostly acrylic, I was used to being able to, you know, paint, and if it had made a mistake it was fine because I could just go back in with another layer of acrylic and it wouldn't matter. But gouache is a little bit trickier too. So I think by this point I was using acrylic gouache to try and get around that. I don't use much acrylic gouache now, but at the time it was much easier for me when creating sort of backgrounds like this, when you're doing a lot of foreground detail. Another Ghibli study. I really liked this one. It took a long time. It was a really good exploration for shadow. Again, I know I've said it before, but if you do want to practice shadow and depth, Studio Ghibli studies are just great. You learn so much. You can always tell when it's a Ghibli study, I feel. They have a very distinctive look and feel and very distinctive colours. It's always a lot brighter than the greens I use, and I love it. But when I come to mixing my own greens, sometimes they just can end up looking a bit murky because I forget how to get these vibrant, amazing colours. And one thing that I'm still practicing with actually. It took a long time, but actually now I'm looking at it, it doesn't look like it was very hard, but I think I seem to remember struggling with it a bit. I think I got bored. I remember doing this and really loving the way this was sitting, and then working over here and just getting so bored with this bit. I was thinking, oh god, not another depth, not another hedge. Just blank that bit out. And it looks alright. This is the last one. Last page in the sketchbook. So I went here 2019 in Fuji Kawaguchiko. When I went, it wasn't for the cherry blossoms. I was a bit early in the season. I went early March, so it was still snowing when I went. But I found this amazing reference photo of the trees in full bloom, and it just looked beautiful. It was dusk. I'd never tried painting a dusk painting before, so using those purples and rich colours was really lovely. I really miss painting the green again. I think it looks nice. I just, again, it's not something I'd have on my wall in my house, so therefore I don't really like it. But technically I think it's okay. It was really fun building all these layers of blossom here. I love messier, quicker brush strokes. I think, you know, these laborious blending and neat lines are just so dull. So having at least one element of creative mess was really fun. I think it's okay. I think I had by this point practiced blending a little bit here, so you can tell that these layers of cloud here are a little bit better blended. Still not great, but I'd learned from this part anyway. Yeah. So there it is, my first sketchbook, my first teeny sketchbook. A lot of learning and a lot of time went into this, so I think it's one of those things that I'm going to keep forever and just look back on as I continue to grow and my style continues to change. And I think that's one interesting thing about painting, is that, you know, you think your style is one thing and then, you know, 3 months later it's completely changed and your style has adapted, and you're always learning as well. Yeah, I'd love to know what you think, and whether you're working in a little sketchbook yourself, whether you've got any projects that you're trying to achieve this year, what your art goals. I've started a new sketchbook, slightly bigger than this one, and I'm trying to keep everything a little bit messier, a little bit more organic, so we'll see how that goes. I'm not very good at being uncontrolled. I like controlling what I'm painting, so we'll see. Maybe in a few months I'll be taking you through that sketchbook. Yeah, anyway, I'd love to hear what you're working on. Let me know, and thank you for watching. I hope this was interesting, at least. Bye!